It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them, so thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. Today, my guest is Jim Nooney, Chief Executive Officer of Nooney Controls. Established in 1982, Nooney Controls is a valve automation integrator, serving customers primarily in the domestic and international power generation and energy sector with application-specific custom control valves and valve automation. Nooney Controls was established by Jim's father, and he became CEO in 2001, overseeing 3 times growth over the past 18 years, with 2018 revenue exceeding $20 million. Nooney Control has 27 employees, and Jim Nooney is also a C12 member. Jim Nooney, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you, Brant. It's a pleasure to be here, and look forward to the interview.
Well, it's great to have you here. And, we've had a chance to chat a couple of times before getting started. And I was just about to begin asking you about your early years. And I thought, no, we start the podcast that way. So let's get that going. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and, what your early family life was like.
I consider myself a Rhode Islander.
Yeah.
I've lived in Rhode Island most of my life, although my father had a career in the valve industry that, like a lot of people in his generation, he was a real company man, and so we moved quite a bit. We lived in outside of Philadelphia. I was actually born in Buffalo, New York.
Oh wow! So you know what winters are like, or did you live there long enough to experience it?
I lived in and then a stint when I started with the business. Lived in Glens Falls, New York. So. A little bit of time in upstate New York. We as a family lived in Elmira, New York for a couple of years. So
beautiful.
Been around, but I mean, I'm a Rhode Islander. And,
cool. And Dad's founded the company, if I'm not mistaken. I know we'll get to that a little bit later. So he worked in the industry and then got
Nooney Controls. Yep.
Nooney Controls. Sorry.
Yep. Yes, exactly. He was worked his way up. He was a draftsman. He went to Brown University in engineering. And that didn't work out, but he did get a job with a valve company in the summer, and that turned into his career. So
awesome. Now, was he an engineer by training? Did he, study that in school, or did he kind of, evolve from a working class background?
Yeah, my grandparents, paternal grandparents, were school teachers. My grandfather was a athletic director and basketball coach, very successful basketball coach here in Rhode Island. And my grandmother was a elementary school teacher. So he grew up working class, slightly post-Depression era. So, part of the greatest generation, I would say.
Yeah, cool. And what about Mom? What was her background?
Her father passed away at a very young age, and my grandmother remarried a man from Greece, as a matter of fact. She grew up in Long Island, and so she's a sort of a New Yorker. She doesn't like to admit that, but she is. And she had a great family life. Her father was her second father. Her stepfather was an attorney in outside of New York City, and did a lot of work for the Greek community in New York City. So cool. A lot of interesting stories there.
Did she work from the home, or did she have a career as well?
She was a housewife and mother, dedicated to that completely and perfectly comfortable there, and just a great mother. I mean, my mother is we all say our mothers are saints, but she was on several levels, a great inspiration for me, even in my career. So,
is she still with us, Jim?
She is. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome.
Both,
she live up in Rhode
are.
Island, or both of them are? Okay. Cool.
Yeah. They live in Rhode Island this summer and South Carolina outside of Charleston in the winter for
nice.
6
Beautiful
months.
Down
So
there.
they got it.
Beautiful down there.
They got it made.
Yeah. Awesome. Brothers and sisters?
I have one sister, and
Okay.
she is a couple years younger than I am.
Yeah.
We've always had a very good relationship. She was a school teacher by trade, but she ended up having 4 children and homeschooling them. So she took her education background and translated to homeschool mom. And her kids are all grown and out of the house now. So she actually came to work for me a few years ago.
Oh, good.
And I would consider her one of my excellent employees.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So she is in the business.
She is, yeah.
What role does she play?
It's an administrative role, not a high level management role, but a role that she's good at and comfortable in. So it's just great to have her here. She's a lot like my mother, so she brought a lot of the traits that my mother had when she
Excellent.
worked here years ago. So it's been fun to watch.
Yeah, cool. What about some of the early influences that your parents had on you or your sister, from those early years? Do you remember specific things or lessons that were learned? For example, we're both men of faith involved in the C12 group. Was that an important part of your upbringing, or did you come to Christianity later in your life?
Well, actually, I accepted Christ when I was in second grade. So it's
awesome.
It's been whatever that is, 50 years, close to 50 years. So. And I'm grateful to say that I have a lot to show for it. So I'm grateful to my parents. My mother accepted Christ when she was a young woman. We lived in Philadelphia. I was a small child, and my father did not follow suit. And he was very dedicated to his career, traveled a lot, a good father, but did not share my mother's faith. And I think over a period of years, watched my mother transform and become a new person. And I think that was a huge influence on my father. And eventually he accepted Christ and then watching him be transformed. So I think that, for me, the influence of my parents is a big part of it is their faith. And also, they gave me a lot of freedom. So they loved me, but they gave me a lot of freedom. They allowed me to fail, and just kind of reminiscing about that with my mother recently, and laughing about it a little bit. A lot of freedom, and it paid off. I think that I'm grateful for that.
That's a very common trait in many of the CEO interviews we've done is that, willingness to fail, right? Take those risks, et cetera. Did that start as a kid? Were there things that you did that they encouraged you to do that you recall that you failed at and learned the lesson from and, did it better the next time? Or did that come later in life?
I think that came later in life. Yeah. I think just that the freedom allowed me to try different things, do different things. I guess, throughout one thread in my life has been that I love a lot to do a lot of different things. So I'm a kind of a jack of all, master of none, which I think is, has suited me well and served me well. And I give my parents the credit for that.
Keeps life interesting too, doesn't it? I kind of pursue that in our executive search practice. I get questions all the time about, well, why aren't you specializing in one industry? And I said, why would I want to do that? I get a chance to learn about, controls and valves and real estate and all types of different things. And it's a very interesting part of life. Any other early influencers, were there coaches or music teachers or other folks that you remember early on that had an impact? Maybe Sunday school teachers. I know I had a couple.
Yeah. Well, I was saved by my Sunday school teacher, so I can't. That's
great.
I can't not mention that. But what comes to mind, I think, there are many people have influence, and it's be a long list. But I go back to my grandmother and grandfather, my father's grandmother and grandfather, father and mother. My grandfather was a school teacher and basketball coach, and very well loved and admired here in our little Rhode Island. And I got to kind of witness that, and what I witnessed with my grandfather, and just the kind of person he was very relational, very kind to people, and great sense of humor. And so that was kind of how do you conduct yourself? He was a great example.
Were they believers as well, your grandparents?
They were not. They were
Okay.
not. But I pray that they made that decision before they passed from this earth. When I was a kid, I reminded them that was a decision they needed to make. So
Good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you.
And my grandmother was the opposite.
Some of us plant seeds, other of us harvest, right, Jim? You were saying, I'm sorry, your grandmother was what?
My grandmother was the school teacher,
Okay.
kind of a hard nose, very strict, very disciplined, and those are good things. And so
Right.
I took some of that from her. She was the one who didn't take anything from anybody.
I love it.
And there's a little bit of that we all need that at some level at times.
Sure. Speaking of school, were you a good student?
I was a terrible student.
Thank you for your vulnerability.
Yeah, I can't whitewash that one. I was a terrible student. I was before the term ADD came about. I was that person. So I was that kid. Couldn't sit still. Back then it was called ants in your pants. Now it's ADD. But there was no, if there was no medication for it, it was simply you're going to have to figure it out. So. Yeah, I was not a good student.
Were you dyslexic as well? I mean, of course, that wasn't diagnosed in those days, but typically those things go together.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think I was I just had a hard time sitting still, and so that kind of dogged me through all the way through college. I mean, I got through it, but I was always strong coming out of the box, and then I'd fade because I had a hard time staying with it. So it's.
What kind of things did you pursue outside of class, whether sports or music, theater, politics?
I played every sport. Again, jack of all, master of none. I played. You go down the list of high school sports and college sports. I played them all. I played in the tennis team for a little while, but in the golf team, I played basketball in high school, college, baseball, high school, and college, intramural hockey. I just, anything sports, I was on it. And I kind of regret that actually, because I think didn't allow me for a little bit broader life experience in those years. I wish that I had taken up some musical instruments and had done maybe a little bit of theater. So I regret that.
It's never too late, Jim.
I agree. I love music and yeah, you're right. There are things in my retirement that I'm ready for.
There you go. What about entrepreneurial approaches? Did you do things like have the ubiquitous paper route or, sell Christmas cards or, other types of activities to earn pocket change?
Yeah, I was pretty entrepreneurial. I think that pocket change is the right word. I always liked to have money in my pocket. That was a kind of a source of control. And so, yeah, I always had a job of some sort.
What kind of jobs were those, particularly in high school and maybe
in high school,
in college?
I had summer jobs that I always start a little bit early. And I worked for a builder, home builder. I worked for a nursery, outdoor nursery. I never did retail. I always kind of shied away from it. I always wanted to be outside. So I had a lot of outdoor jobs and had the paper route. Did a lot of painting. When I was in college, I started a painting business, and that was led to some very interesting experiences.
It sounded like going to college was kind of a necessary assumed fact. Did you finance your way? Did mom and dad help? Were you on scholarships?
Yeah, I had the opportunity to go to a prep school here in Rhode Island, and that was an eye-opening experience because I was academically not really up to the challenge, but my father had faith that I could. And so that probably saved me because it taught me how to study. I lived at the school, and so we had 2.5, 3 hours every night where the door closed and they checked on you and you had to study. And I think had I not had that experience, I think college would have been a disaster.
Yeah, our youngest daughter went to Taft down here in Connecticut, and that's what, brought us out. And, she said the same thing. Once she got to college, you could really separate the kids that, were really prepped and knew how to study from, and those that went to boarding schools versus those that didn't. It does teach you those habits. What school did you go to?
It's called Moses Brown, and it's right next to Brown University. It's the same Brown family and 300-year-old school. Ivy covered, the, classic New England prep school. So it was... when I was there, I don't think I appreciated it, but later on I realized what a gift that was. And I learned a lot there.
And how did you make a decision about what college to go to and what to study?
Yeah, if you've been through the prep school routine, that's a huge part of the their
feeder.
value is they want to put you in the right school. They want you to go to the school they'd like you to go to. And I remember sitting down with the counselor and my parents, and they said, Jim, here's some suggestions. And I said, in all honesty, I already picked my school. And they said, oh, great. I said, I'm going to Gordon College. And they totally perplexed. Gordon College. Never heard of Gordon College. And
did you pick it yourself?
Well, I had some people guiding me a little bit, but I realized I wanted to go to Christian college. And I think because I was at a prep school where faith was not something anybody really wanted to talk about, very secular. And I just felt like, my faith and my walk with God is going to be, was a little bit hampered at Moses Brown. I thought Christian college would be a good place for me. I don't regret it. Where is
Gordon? I don't think I'm familiar with it.
Gordon is on the North Shore of Boston, on Cape Ann, in a little town called Wenham, just kind of outside the large population centers of Boston. So it's beautiful, beautiful place right on the coastline.
Far enough away from home where, you weren't urged to come home every weekend, but when the laundry needed to be done, you were able to do so.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's a great place. I still have a lot of connections with Gordon, and it's a Christian liberal arts college, about 1,700 students. So
wow, small. Yeah. Good. I bet you love that environment. What did you do work as well during college? Was that kind of the paint business and some of the other things that you referred to, or was there other work that was maybe more like, did you work for your dad, for example? Was that part of your college time?
Yeah. No, my dad actually, he left his vice president of sales position with this valve company right when I was, I think, a sophomore in college.
And that's when he founded Nooney Controls?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah. And so he, took a huge leap of faith. I was in college. My sister was just about to go into college.
Wow.
I think back of that decision, and I think, but what a
high risk.
What a high risk. But, my father's very, a man of faith and also a man of determination. And I don't think he ever thought he wasn't going to succeed. I think it was just a matter of how quickly would he succeed, not if he would succeed. So, I always had jobs in college. I started a painting business with some friends outside of Boston. As you might imagine, if you live in Connecticut, there's still a lot of wooden houses. And so painting opportunities were endless.
Particularly with the harsh weather, right?
Oh, yeah, endless.
Springtime.
So that was my first real opportunity to learn how to do business. And I learned a lot. It was a great experience. Managing people, managing friends is tough. That's ultimately what ended it is, trying to manage your friends.
Sure.
But yeah, that was a great experience, very hard work and lucrative. We actually got an opportunity to do some work for a family up on North Shore in Manchester by the Sea, a very wealthy town.
Oh yeah.
And they liked our work, and so they ended up they had a large mansion on Martha's Vineyard, and they asked me if I would grab a couple people and come out and paint their mansion on Martha's Vineyard for a summer.
Oh,
and we lived in the house.
And put you up for it. Oh, fantastic!
We lived in the house up on the third floor, had a view of
what a great summer that must have been.
It was a summer to remember. Yeah, it was.
Bet.
It was hard work, but it was another great learning experience. And
that's great. That's great. Well, what was the first job out of Gordon then that you took?
Well, I'm a unique person in that I've worked for one company my entire career.
Yeah. So you started as a sales engineer then with Dad, right?
Mm-hmm. I was considering really starting a serious painting business and going big with it. I think the opportunity was there.
Well, after that summer on Martha's Vineyard, I can understand why.
Yeah, I mean it's lucrative, and so I thought, well, I could do this. I could take my business knowledge and education and take it. And my father was Nooney Controls starting to grow, and he said, "We need people right now, and I would love for you to work for us, but I'm not going to demand it. And you've got a week to decide." So he gave me a week. And it was a hard decision, but I felt like, I love my father and we get along well. normal conflicts of father-son, but in general, great relationship. So I decided to do it. And so I got to do a little of everything. The first few years, the company only had, I think 5 employees when I started in 1985.
Wow. Did you have some early leadership experiences there? Did you go right into managing people, or did that come a little later?
No, my first step was managing myself, figuring out how to.
That's an important part to master.
I think what happened, really, I've spent about a year and a half at our headquarters here in Rhode Island, and then some of our suppliers were really eager to try to expand and get us to expand. And so we needed someone to go to Maine, go to northern New England to sell to the paper mills and power plants up there. And so,
did you have a branch office up there, or was it literally just stay in a hotel and going door to door?
Yeah, I set up a little office, rented some space outside of Augusta, Maine, and I lived in Amesbury, Mass, and commuted up to Maine and northern New Hampshire every week. And it was brutal. I mean, that was a brutal experience.
Cold calling, sounds like. In the cold, literally.
Well, you've heard the term smokestack chasing. That's what I did.
I'd not heard of that. That's great. I understand. Oh, my goodness.
And that was that was my first opportunity to learn how to handle rejection. And I didn't have anybody around me. I was alone, and it was a very hard time. And it was
sure.
I would call in down here in Rhode Island and get a little bit of encouragement every couple of days, but it was just trying to manage my emotions, and really that time was rejection, and then learning how to build relationships and business relationships are everything, and that was something I had to learn how to do well, and I think I did. So what
was the biggest challenge during that period? It sounds like obviously a lot of rejection, as you mentioned, but, was it because of the competition? Was it they didn't need your products? Were they struggling? What were some of the issues you were up against as you tried to, broaden the landscape?
I was up against pretty much everything. I think my father knew it would be hard. I don't think he knew it was going to be that hard, but I still am grateful for the experience. It shapes a lot of my career now, but there was established suppliers up there that had been there for many years. They were more experienced than I was. I was very young.
Probably talking to people twice your age, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, many times. It could teach me a lot, and I learned a lot from those customers, like often we do. But I think also it was a booming time for the paper industry. So the paper industry is slowly dying in New England, but it was at its peak during that time, and so there was a huge amount of project work and.
Was this the 80s, Jim?
This was the late 80s.
Late 80s, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So and then we had some products we were trying to sell that were not well known. So trying to do the missionary work for the product that didn't have name recognition. So I was stacked against me.
Did faith play a role at all in handling some of that rejection?
Absolutely. I think that if I had without my faith, I would have quit. I think. I went back to Massachusetts every week and got around my friends, got around my church family, and we got recharged. It's truly how it worked. I have to say, Monday mornings were not a happy time in those days, but I wouldn't have traded it for the world, really.
You slogged through it. Yeah. Do you remember the first time you started managing people, Jim?
I think. My father felt like he was getting ready. He needed to get ready, start to prepare to step down, and that was in the mid '90s. And so I came back here to Rhode Island. I'd actually. So
you'd been about 10 years or so with the company by then, or a little less?
Yeah, about 10 years. So I was in Maine, and then we needed to open an office in Eastern New York to pursue a large OEM customer, GE, and so I got married, and moved all at the same time to upstate New York to establish an office there. And that was a really important time in my career as well, because that was the first time I had successes. Sure. And so had a small office there, did that for about 5 or 6 years, and then came back to Rhode Island. So Rhode Island was coming back here to the headquarters was the first time that I had to even consider, managing other people. And I really wasn't.
So did you move right into the CEO slot, or were there interim positions after you had your sales engineering job?
Still a sales engineer for the most part. No real leadership requirements, but I was watching.
Yeah, right. Right.
I was watching some good things that I observed from my father and his partner, and some not so good things. So I think, try to learn from some of their.
What were some of the not so good things? Those are always some of the interesting ones, right? Kind of like your comment about failure early on with mom. What were some of the observational behaviors that you said, you know what, I think I'll do things differently when I'm the boss?
I think that in all due credit to my father, he came in, started from scratch, and he didn't really have a lot of management training,
right.
So he was kind of learning on the fly. And so some of the things that I saw that I thought were pretty destructive were changing the rules for the employees. I witnessed commitments made and broken that I'm sure in his mind were legit and made sense for the business, but they really undermined some of his leadership and some of his credibility. And so I learned from that, and I think he learned from that later on. But I think that was something I observed, and I thought, boy, this can be really disruptive, and
right.
I have to be careful with that. So that was one thing I learned. The other was my father's partner occasionally had some pretty aggressive shouting matches, I guess you'd say. And I watched that be pretty negative thing on the morale of the business and the other employees. So I'm cut from the same cloth. In the past.
Were they 50-50 partners? Was he?
No, my father
investor?
he was a minority partner, but a valuable partner and treated very equally in many ways. And so they had disagreements, and the disagreements occasionally, not often, but occasionally got heated. And it was something that I don't think either of them realized was as destructive to the culture as it was. So
yeah, and the examples to others. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Yeah. What are some of the lessons that you learned in those early management days of managing people specifically?
Well, I think that not changing the rules, being consistent. I think one of the things that I really learned early on was that my job really is to be a servant. So as a leader, that my job number one is to be a servant, to really equip everyone else to do their job the best they possibly can. And that I learned that. I mean, I realized that early on. I don't think I knew how to do it well, but I learned that I really felt like that was clear in my mind, and that I was a steward of this business. That it wasn't ever going to be mine. It was going to be something that I was stewarding, and I think that was a very important realization, and something that allowed me to grow and to build a really good team and a good culture. And so I'm grateful for that.
Did you come to that realization before you became CEO?
Yes, I think so.
That's very much a C12 principle, isn't it? It's God's given us this business, and we're stewards to do the best with it, with regards to helping others and, showing our love to Him, right?
Amen.
And those that work with us. Yeah,
I think when I came into C12, that was in large part why I came to C12, because
a detractor.
Yeah. Quick story, if you don't mind. I realized probably about 4 or 5 years into being the CEO here that I really was woefully untrained or woefully incapable of leading well, and I needed some help. And I thought about possibly hiring some management consultants and talked to a few. Didn't click at all. So I went. I was invited to go to a meeting with Vistage, and I mentioned that to you when we spoke earlier.
Yep. Right.
Secular version C12, and I thought, boy, this is perfect. But as I got further into it, I realized that in the end, the most important thing in this equation is how I can allow people to see Christ through me, and so this Vistage thing really wasn't going to align with that very well.
That was a piece that was missing. Yeah.
Yep, a piece was missing, and so investigated C12 and then realized this is perfect. This is exactly what I need. And
that's great. Well, you've got a great group up there. My chair, Bill Jolly, who I know you've known, has been up there a couple of times and joined your group. And I told him, I've threatened him that I'd like to come up sometime too and join. So I've had the opportunity, since we have homes in both California and Connecticut, to go to a couple of the meetings down south. And I just think it's great to be able to have, that connection with other men. I'm really looking forward to our conference in Atlanta coming up in May as well, and meeting so many other men that, kind of are aligned in that way. When did you take over as CEO, Jim?
In 2001.
Okay, got it. So it was about 20 years or so with the company, or 15 or so, I guess, by the time you were there. Is that right?
Yeah, about 15. Yep. So I was, it was a, I got to be honest, I didn't feel like I was up to the challenge. I didn't feel like I was qualified at all. But I was the logical choice, and I was willing. I think a lot of times, like we say to our children, hey, listen, you may not be confident in yourself, but I am, and you can do this. And my father, in other words, basically said that. And so I figured if he had faith in me to do this, then I could do it. And I didn't have the faith in myself, that's for sure. So I think that was the part that was hard in the first few years, is that the lack of confidence and insecurity that, got in the way of a lot of different things. I inherited some longtime employees that were much older than I am, and that was a real challenge to get through that, figure out how to do that. So.
And the partner, did he stay involved in the business after Dad retired?
He exited a few years earlier.
Okay, got it.
So the way was cleared for me to be able to do things the way I want to do them. It was just unclear exactly the best way.
Did Dad stay involved in the business? Did he, kind of go to the executive chairman role, or stay on in the office for a while? Or did he pretty much exit and say, here are the keys, I'm going fishing?
Well, it wasn't fishing, it was golfing, but yes.
Okay. One of the two.
Yeah, he was done. When he was done, he was done. And I think in many ways, I think that was a gift, because it allowed me to develop relationships and prove myself to employees and vendors, and the key relationships that we had with key customers.
Right.
I think if he'd been hanging around, that would have been hard.
Sure.
And I think he understood that. So I appreciated that. So, yeah, but I had to figure it out. And
Right. And you've been a CEO for almost 20 years now, 18, 19 years. How would you say your leadership style has evolved over that time, Jim?
Well, I think that just by kind of osmosis, I've understood that I really want to be a level 5 leader. So referring to John Maxwell's
right.
5 levels, I think that his methodology wasn't in front of me then, but I think I came to my own conclusions that I realized that's the best leadership for me.
Yeah,
is to build relationships with my employees and my vendors. Our relationships are everything. We say it often: people buy from people. We're an engineered product, very technical, yet at the same time, the most success we've had is when we build really good relationships with our vendors and our customers. So
sure.
Protecting relationships and building them, valuing them, it was always important, but then learning how to do that well. And then I think, like I said earlier, being a servant, I think equipping my employees, it's very easy in your small business to feel like you have to be the best at everything. And I think early on, I felt like I had to be the best at everything. Since I did almost every role in the company over the years, I felt like that to be the best CEO, I had to be able to do everybody's job as well as them or better. And that's totally flawed. And I learned that pretty quickly, because as we grew, that was not possible.
Either that or you don't sleep much because you're really trying to do everything, and that's just going to wear you out.
It wears you out, too many hours and no balance. And I think my employees get discouraged by that at some level. You don't realize they do, but they do. That you're not developing them. You're not making them stronger. You're making them weaker.
Right. Doesn't help anybody. Yeah. No, that's very thoughtful. You inherited a certain company culture with Dad and his partner who grew the business. Since then, have you thought that think that your company culture has evolved over that period? What are your thoughts about that?
I think we always had good culture. I think a real strong sense of respect for one another. But I think that my father was really challenged by how do I integrate my faith and my work.
Yeah.
And that was a tension. And he had a partner, although a minority partner, who wasn't a man of faith.
Okay.
He wasn't equally yoked, and that was an obstacle. So he did what he could do. When he stepped down, it sort of opened the door for me to do things a little bit differently.
Right.
And I think.
Have you further integrated that in? Would you say that people know you or know, Nooney Controls as a faith-based or a Christian-based organization?
I hope so. I think so. I think I've never hid it. I think that one of the things that I remind myself all the time of, and is the cliche, be the same person, be the same man on Monday morning as you were on Sunday morning.
Right.
And I that's just in the back of my mind all the time.
It's living it that matters, really, right? And treating your employees fairly and your customers with a high degree of integrity and ethics.
Love, and I think loving your employees and loving your is something that I enjoy. It's not work. That's the Holy Spirit. That's not me.
Yeah.
And it's just that just keeps getting unpacked, and as time passes, doing more and more ministry, and we have like any company, we have a very large diversity of personalities and beliefs, but I believe that pretty much every employee is at some level grateful to work for a CEO who is a person of faith, and who, because they're really beneficiary of my faith, and I think they know that, and that's a fun thing to watch. Really, I think people are flourishing here because they know that I care about them and I love them, and I think that's important. It's not about me. It's not any great thing I did. It's really just trying to be faithful.
Following the example, right? When Jesus boiled it down, right, there's 2 commandments: love God and love others, right? So, yeah, that's a great opportunity to do that. Jim, we talked a little bit about people. What do you look for when you're making bets on, the people you're going to invest in, either through hiring them or, new customers, new relationships?
Well, I think when you talk about employees, our business has evolved and my process is evolved. And I think C12 has been a really important part of that, how to understand how to do that well. But then trying to put feet to it is always the challenge. And so the starting point is really to be looking for people with the character that fits the culture. And that's first. So even though we're a business where, professional skills or technical skills are critically important in many roles, it has to be that culture, that character fits the culture first approach. And so we have core values that we've had in place for a number of years, and that's where I start. Is I lay them in front of any prospective employee and make sure they understand what that means, give them an opportunity to ask the question, and then really ask, then try to find out who they are.
Sure. Let them self-select as well. Sometimes putting that out there is very helpful. We've got a number of growing number of C12 clients in our executive search practice, and we always put in, Christian-based or faith-based organization in the job descriptions for the work we do with them. And, sometimes I'll get clients say, well, is that really necessary? I say, well, yeah, it is, because that's going to really help others to be able to know where you stand. And, that allows us to not get into embarrassing questions that might, be challenging for them further down the line. And, I think that's terrific. You lay those out. What are those core values, Jim? Can you share those with us?
Sure. Yeah. They're, first is apply biblical principles of diligence, gratefulness, humility, patience, grace, and forgiveness. So that's the starting point.
Yeah.
Follow through with what we say we'll do. Communicate directly with honesty and respect, thoughtful evaluation to find the best solution, embrace change when change is the best course, but at the same time, stability to perpetuate what we do well and instill confidence. So those are our core values, and I have them everywhere. They can't be missed. And what I've begun to see over the last few years is that whenever there's a problem, a conflict, something that needs to be fixed, that employees now go there before I point them there, which is great, because they understand that that's where I'm going to start. How does this measure up to our core values? This new opportunity, this new customer, the way we're going to resolve this conflict.
It's the yardstick. It's the metrics against which to evaluate.
It makes it easier. It makes it a lot easier. I think it's, I think everybody knows it's easier to know where you're going if you have, if you can see. But I think that, for many years I didn't have that. And so it was kind of a moving target, and this makes it much easier.
When did you develop the core values?
Probably been about seven or 8 years.
Yeah.
So it's been enough time that people really understand that I'm serious about it. It's not just a piece of paper or a plaque. This is who we are.
Did you do that alone? Did you do that with some of the key employees? How did you come around to those?
I think that some C12 guys helped, but I think it was really just like we always say, if you're going to write a mission statement, if you're going to write core values, say what you do. Maybe not every employee does that, but say what you do. Don't make it up. It can't be the North Star in that it's something to reach for. It's got to be something that you are. So define who you are. And so, I wrote it. It was pretty easy to write when you say, okay, you're really just writing out what you believe and who you are.
Well, Jim Nooney, you've been very, very generous with your time. Thank you. We always kind of end with one question, and our middle market audience, as I mentioned to you in our earlier conversations, that listen to this, many of them are in the C-suite. Some of them are perhaps in family businesses like yourself, second, third, fourth generation. Others are, looking to maybe found their own company. And what kind of career and life advice would you give to folks that are listening, that really do have their eyes of getting into their own corner office of their own someday?
Well, I think the first one is that it's okay to be impatient for results, but it's not okay to be impatient with your employees. So I think patience with the people around you is something that I have learned that is extremely helpful and valuable, and part of the respect aspect of our business. So that's the encouragement that I give people is show patience, listen well.
Right.
Second one, I think, is to aspire to a level 5 leader where people are following you because of what you stand for. So I think that's something that I aspire to, is that level 5 leadership, and something that is a game changer for any business if you have a leader that is that level 5 leader. And then the third is don't work too much.
Get a right balance. Huh?
Balance is everything. Yeah, balance is a must. Without balance, no matter how talented you are, no matter how good you are, no matter how smart you are, things will unravel at some point.
Well, Jim Nooney, CEO of Nooney Controls, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thank you, Brand. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.